hearty welcome to one and all. This is episode 178 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel but haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. So this is going to be a little bit of an unusual cross-referenced, cross-indexed sort of an episode. This will be the 11th entry in our ongoing series, Guilty Pleasure Movies. But it's also, today, is George Clooney's 63rd birthday. So what better way to celebrate George Clooney's 63rd birthday on a movie-themed podcast than by talking about one of the ultimate guilty pleasure movies, the movie that made me a George Clooney fan for life. 1996's Quentin Tarantino, written, co-starred, and Robert Rodriguez directed From Dusk Till Dawn. Now, I saw From Dusk Till Dawn in theaters on its opening night. This would have been January 1996. And I fucking loved it right away. I should also point out that even though I consider this a guilty pleasure movie, it's actually a good movie. This is not Cobra with its 16% Rotten Tomatoes or Armed and Dangerous or some of the other movies like Hard to Kill, where the movies are just shit and I love them. This, I would argue, despite the fact that it has the trappings of exploitation film and it has a lot of really over-the-top, ridiculous violence and bloodshed and mayhem and whatnot, I think it's a terrific film. And the Rotten Tomato score is in the 70s, which is it's an indicator of quality. But I still consider it a guilty pleasure movie because it has so many elements of trash. It is very high concept, well acted, well written trash. An exploitation film done about as well as you can do it. So I remember going to the movies the night that it opened, and the reviews, the local New York critics liked the movie. This isn't one of those where everybody's giving it 1 star and I'm saying, I don't give a fuck, I'm going. The general consensus was, it's absurd, it's really fucking stupid. The movie takes an incredible right turn about 45 minutes to an hour in. There is so much quality, though, throughout the production, and Tarantino himself talked about it being an exploitation film. It was his take on this sort of movie, but he can't help but have the writing be great. And the early sections of the film, when it is coming across like a sort of second cousin of Pulp Fiction with the setup of these two kind of notorious thieves, they could have been two of the guys from Reservoir Dogs. Although I think these guys are, well, certainly Tarantino's character is worse. But you have these guys, and they are just on the run from the law, and they're trying to presumably get safe passage to Mexico. They've got money, all of this shit. So it's that kind of setup. And I was with the story the whole way. The opening scene sequence in a convenience store is fantastic. John Hawkes, terrific actor, was so great in The Perfect Storm a couple of years later. And Michael Parks, somebody who Tarantino worked with numerous times and really, really good in a kind of small role as a local, I don't know if he's a local sheriff. But Clooney was pretty young. He was still in his 30s. His hair had just ever so slightly started to go gray, but it was still mostly very, very dark brown. And I knew what I was in for. This was a movie that previews spoiled. If you go in completely cold, and nobody's really going to go in completely cold now with social media being what it is, but for those who went in completely cold, if all they knew was written by Tarantino, directed by Rodriguez, George Clooney, who was obviously Nepo baby, Rosemary Clooney and all that kind of shit, Miguel Ferrer was his uncle, his half-brother, Jose Ferrer, Miguel Ferrer. Miguel Ferrer, the late great actor, was George's half-brother. But George was on the TV show ER, and he was incredible. And you knew that he just looked like a leading man, and he maybe had to make some adjustments in his line delivery and acting style. He used to do this thing where he would just kind of put his head down and look up, and he did it all the time, and then he kind of moved away from it. He does it in this film, but as time went on, he didn't do it very much, and he just relied on his natural charisma, which can't teach that in an acting class. George Clooney is just one of those special people. He's always had it. He's always had the ability to engage on screen and to hold the camera and to be the center of attention even when surrounded by other big stars. You look at the Ocean's movies, how many huge stars he's surrounded by. It's George's movie. He's doing his thing and he's running shit. So in From Dusk Till Dawn, George plays Seth Gecko, a great name. And Tarantino plays Richard Gecko, and they're these guys on the run from the law. And they need a way to get across the border, and then they'll wait for their contact, their kind of point person that will take them to this mysterious place called El Rey. And they kind of kidnap / hijack a family. Harvey Keitel is the dad. And Juliette Lewis, who was still a big star at the time, plays the daughter, and I don't remember the name of the actor who plays the brother. It's not a typical Harvey Keitel role. His character starts off as more of a man of thought than a man of action, and his character kind of turns into more than just a man of thought as the story unfolds. But they manage to get across the border, and if you don't know what's in store, you have a moment where you say, well, now what? Because it seemed that this was setting up to how are they going to get across the border? How are they going to get to meet their point person to get safe haven? They've already done like 90% of what they said they had to do. Now it's just a matter of waiting for their guy. They're just going to hang out and shoot the shit in a bar, and then an hour later the movie's going to... So this is what you would be thinking. Unfortunately for them, the bar that they go to, the Titty Twister... It's a biker bar, but it's not really a biker bar. Like, you wouldn't want any biker you know to go there unless you really hated their guts and wished them dead, because you go to this bar and you don't come out. It is a bar that is populated by creatures of the night, aka vampires. And the movie goes from this Pulp Fiction Reservoir Dogs first like 40 minutes or so, and then all of a sudden turns into Scream, Dracula, Scream, Mark of the Vampire, The Lost Boys, Near Dark, Fright Night. It's a melange of every vampire movie you've seen. And the 90s had, like, it was a rebirth of the vampire movie genre. There were so many that came out in a short time frame, including this one. You had Nadia, you had The Hunger, well, no, not The Hunger, was the 80s. You had The Addiction with Lily Taylor. There were so many vampire movies, Dracula Dead and Loving It, Innocent Blood by John Landis. And many of them were big budget movies. Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Coppola, 1992. So Hollywood, as they go in cycles, they're just banging out one vampire movie after another. So Clooney's character does not believe in vampires, but he believes in what he's seeing, which is that we're surrounded by fucking vampires and we're probably not only going to die, but we're going to die horribly. So it's interesting seeing the film in theaters. Tarantino, I don't know if when he wrote the script, he always knew he was going to play Richard Gecko. That I don't know. I assume he hoped to, but I'm not sure if he always knew that was going to be played by him. Because the character he's just a horrific, he's like, you could argue worse than the vampires. He's so bad, he's such a disgusting piece of crap that there's a moment in the movie, spoiler alert, he turns into a vampire. Oops, I spoiled it 28 plus years later, sorry. Turns into a vampire, and spoiler alert, he is put out to pasture because he's turned to a vampire. He can't be saved. So I remember when the movie reaches that point, and there was kind of a shock, a hushed gasp around the crowd. We weren't expecting our guy Quentin, who had come off, Pulp Fiction was not that far in the rearview mirror, less than a year since it had hit, I should say just about a year since it opened wide in the United States, late 94, early 95. But Tarantino was in a ton of shit. He was in the movie Four Rooms. He was in Destiny Turns on the Radio. He had written a screenplay for True Romance, which got a lot of play. He'd written a screenplay for Natural Born Killers. And he and Oliver Stone are still arguing about who got the good parts of the movie, who gets the credit and who gets the blame for the stuff that doesn't work. They've been fighting for 3 decades. Oliver Stone would say, whatever works was me. I didn't really even think Quentin's script was that great. Tarantino would say, I love Oliver, but he fucked up my script. How many Oliver Stone films I can tell you I love, I don't love this one. He messed up my script. So nobody really knows. But the point is, Tarantino was front and center, a big personality who seemingly came out of nowhere and was this huge media star in the infancy of the internet age. And so when his character buys the farm, people are shocked. But the character is so horrendous. I mean, George Clooney's character is presumably a killer, a thief, a scumbag, a scoundrel at best, not a good guy. Seems to have a moral code, but he's not a good guy. This is not a Dark Knight. This is a dark piece of shit, more like as opposed to a Dark Knight. But he does have a certain code. He's not going to shoot people and commit mass murder, and he's not going to commit sexual violence on anybody. It's not the way that he's wired. So yeah, he has the criminal brain, but there are levels where he's not going to go, and Tarantino has zero filter, zero levels. So when his horrendous character dies, hush gasp, and a guy behind me, there's always a guy behind me. A guy behind me yells out, "You deserve all that and more." Bro, it's a movie. You deserve all that and more. And I had to agree with him. He did deserve all that and more. He deserved to live life in purgatory, endless hell. That's how horrendous Richard Gecko is. So Clooney has a moment. I hate to say this, but the moment that made me a George Clooney fan for life. Because I knew who he was. I'd maybe seen an episode or two of ER. I didn't really watch much network television. I mean, I just didn't. But he had a likable screen presence. And I remember the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, there's this extraordinary striptease sequence with Salma Hayek. And Salma Hayek, spoiler alert, she's also a vampire. So when the shit hits the fan, and there's an incredible sequence that almost got the movie an R rating, where there is so much X-rated, there's blood and death and sex, but mostly blood and death. And they had to kind of edit little bits and pieces out. But during this crazy scrum, Salma Hayek's vampire has the drop on George Clooney. He's probably dead. But then she tells him, I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to turn you fully. I'm going to make you my slave. I'm going to make you my slave. And unbeknownst to her, Clooney has figured out how to reload his gun while she pretty much has her shoe on him, doesn't think he can do anything, doesn't think he can move. She thinks he's more or less immobilized. So as she is going through all of this stuff, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. I'm going to make you my slave. And Clooney gets the gun reloaded and goes, no thanks, I've already had a wife, and blows her to kingdom come. Now, I was 22 when I saw this movie. I had zero social life. I didn't think I was ever going to have anything approaching a social life. I wasn't getting married. I wasn't even thinking that I could get a girl's phone number when I was 22. That was way beyond my grasp, right? But something about the anger that he says, no thanks, I already had a wife. Boom. I wasn't the only one cracking up. I don't think the women in attendance were that happy with that line or with the amount of laughter of, in some cases, their male counterparts sitting next to them. But I saw this movie by myself and I was fucking howling. I became a George Clooney fan for life that day. I love the movie. It wasn't just this one wisecrack, because there are plenty of movies that have great one-liners that still suck. I like what Harvey Keitel does in the film because his character he's a pastor, a reverend, who has completely lost his faith. A little bit of a similar thing to 6 years later in M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, which is a way better movie, if I'm being honest, than From Dusk Till Dawn. But in that movie, Mel Gibson's character, father, he's a father, literally and figuratively. I think he's just a priest. Is he a priest? Pastor? Everybody calls him father. The point is that his character lost his faith. He was a man of God, a man of prayer, and his wife was taken away from him and their children in the dumbest way possible. And so he turned his back on God. And Harvey Keitel in this movie, 6 years earlier, it's a similar kind of I've had enough with the Almighty. I'm not praying anymore, and I don't believe. Now that comes into play because the whole thing with a cross and a man of faith, at least in theory, a man of faith and a cross and vampires are in deep caca. So Keitel's performance, he gave so many great performances in the 90s. He was knocking them out one after another. A movie I'm probably going to talk about on the channel was, I think, his previous film that he made to From Dusk Till Dawn, a movie called Smoke, in which he's technically the star, but it's an ensemble piece. William Hurt, Harold Perrineau, among others. He plays a Brooklyn smoke shop owner who takes a photograph, one photo, from the exact same location across the street from his smoke shop every day. And it doesn't seem that interesting, but the movie is so beautiful. It's an incredible film. And he gives a totally different performance in that movie than he did a sequel, Blue in the Face, which really wasn't very good, than he does in From Dusk Till Dawn. Then he does in Pulp Fiction as Winston Wolfe. In Reservoir Dogs, Mr. White. Thelma and Louise, the friendly detective who really doesn't want anything bad to happen to Thelma and Louise. In Bugsy as Mickey Cohen. When Warren Beatty's Bugsy, Benjamin Siegel, threatens him. Mickey Cohen was such a tough son of a bitch, he threatens him right back. You're not going to push me around. I didn't steal shit from you. Here's what I got. I earned that money. You ain't getting anything from me, pal. Bugsy Siegel respects that. But Keitel's career had kind of hit the skids in the 80s. He did the movie with Robert Downey Jr. and Molly Ringwald, The Pickup Artist. Not good. Not good. Harvey was better than that. And so was Downey Jr. and Molly Ringwald. But you got to keep working, right? Got to stay visible. But in this film, Keitel, you can see the gears turning. He's not treating it like he's in an exploitation film, a trashy, ridiculous, guilty pleasure, cheeseball vampire film with crazy special effects. And he had exploitation actors like Fred Williamson in the movie The Hammer, Mr. Mean. He made movies like that. Fred Williamson was a great football player in his day, and he became an actor, similar to Jim Brown. Jim Brown was obviously a better football player. Tom Savini. He played the Creep in Creepshow 2. He was a special effects wizard. And the character that he plays in From Dusk Till Dawn, his name is Sex Machine. What a great name for a character. Every time he tells people his name, got a big laugh. What's your name? Sex Machine. Okay, nice to meet you. And he said, do we call you Sex? Do we call you Machine? Do we call you Mr. Machine? Just call me Sex Machine, no problem. Savini is a riot, and Fred Williamson is also a riot. A lot of the movie is basically nameless, faceless, disgusting vampires trying to end our heroes. And the film is also successful in the sense that we don't really know who's going to make it. It's the sort of film where all bets are off. If you think you know who's going to live and who's going to die, you're probably going to be wrong. And that's a good thing. I like that the movie didn't go a conventional route. It did not stay true to form. It went against the grain and went against expectation. And Juliette Lewis is an actress like a lot of people, kind of grew up with her. She was in Cape Fear. She got an Oscar nomination when she was 18 or 19. She sort of runs hot and cold with me. There are a lot of movies and performances where she got acclaim where I didn't get what she was doing. And I hated Natural Born Killers. Hated it. And I'm not going to blame either Oliver Stone or Tarantino. I think the blame is more, in this instance, on Stone. But that movie just pissed me off. I saw that in theaters. I had no issue with the performances. Woody Harrelson came to play, and he was dynamite. Robert Downey Jr., the character, it didn't really work for me, and Juliette Lewis didn't really work for me. But I thought that film was catastrophically bad. I absolutely hated it. And the reviews were great. Normally, I would be in lockstep. If you have a movie that is at least in the 70s, I'm rarely going to say, what a piece of shit. But I walked out of Natural Born Killers enraged. And that's one of the few movies which most people would say is at least good or worth seeing. I walked out of the theater just wanting to strangle the projectionist. Like, I was so pissed off leaving the theater because I thought I'd been promised a good movie. Instead, I got just 2 hours of fucking trash and piece of shit. I'm still pissed off. I never watched the movie again after that, just bits and pieces. Woody Harrelson is just incredible. He's the only good thing in the movie. Everything else, S-H-I-T. But Juliette Lewis in From Dusk Till Dawn is so good and believable. It's not a movie star performance. She dials back a little bit some of her trademark tics, and she has moments that are really fucking funny. And she's tough. Her character is really tough, but it's believable because it's established early on. She's not going to take shit from anybody. She may still be 19 or 20 or however old she is, but she's nobody's fool. And some of her scenes with George Clooney, particularly in the latter third of the film, are very good. And Clooney also balances, because he wasn't a big movie star yet, he balances the kind of cheeseball elements, because he knew that this wasn't high art, but he also knew that this was going to get him noticed in a different way. And if he delivered the goods, he was probably going to get offered bigger roles, which is exactly what happened. Now, the movie he made with Michelle Pfeiffer that came out late 1996, One Fine Day, I think he turned around from Dusk Till Dawn and shot One Fine Day almost immediately because the color of his hair is just about the same. He kind of grew it out a little bit. One Fine Day is not good. But the next movie that Clooney did was a film that my father was a huge fan of, The Peacemaker, which was pre-9/11, a renegade Russian has access and has a nuclear weapon and is basically going to blow up New York City and maybe the entire Eastern Seaboard. And it's up to George Clooney and Nicole Kidman to stop it. It did okay at the box office. It was kind of a hit. I thought, my dad and I saw it in theaters, and he must have watched it 5 or 6 times at home when it, either on DVD when it got to streaming. He loved it. It was one of his favorite George Clooney movies, definitely in his top 5, maybe even top 3. He could always sit down and watch The Peacemaker, because that was a movie for all the pyrotechnics and the effects work. Most of the effects were mechanical, done during production. There was very little green screen, and there was a lot of amazing stunt work where, as I said, sometimes I can look at a stunt and know exactly how it's done, just from knowledge of film history. And other times I'm not really sure how they did it. There were a couple of stunts in Peacemaker where I'm not quite sure how they pulled it off, which is to the filmmaker. I think there's a Mimi later, to her credit. And that was also, I believe, the first movie produced by DreamWorks. I'm pretty sure about that. Great poster, too. Clooney running, holding a gun, and Nicole Kidman also running, but in what looks like a $30,000 dress. But, you know, whatever. Can't have everything, right? I remember when From Dusk Till Dawn ended. I'm not going to spoil anymore. This is a movie that if you only kind of know what it's about, I don't want to give any more away. It is an absolute rip. It's funny. It has moments of genuine terror and tension. Really, the last 45 minutes of the movie, you could say almost unbearably tense, in part because you really have no idea how this is going to turn out. Who's going to live? Who's going to die? Is everybody going to buy the farm by the end? I don't know. You got to watch the movie. But when I left the theater that night, I had a big smile. I was happy that the movie had worked exactly as I hoped it would, that the strength of Tarantino's writing was going to carry the movie in the early going, which it did. And even as things go completely haywire, you still have a sense of a great writer, and it's his dialogue. And Clooney is great. Tarantino is not a great actor, but he's okay for what he does. And Harvey and Juliette are home run hitters. And like I said, having Fred Williamson and Tom Savini, the kind of cult movie type actors and exploitation actors, brilliant casting, absolutely great. And Williamson has some terrific moments. He has one moment, spoiler alert, where he rips the heart of a vampire out right in front of him. Fucking great. Yeah, I remember leaving the theater being very, very pleased. And it's one of those movies I always recommend to people. If you like horror, but you like a little comedy. See, it's not like Scream, which came out, it was late 96, so it didn't come out for another year. This is, I guess, closer to American Werewolf in London in terms of blending comedy and horror to where the audience is off balance, not really sure exactly where it's all going to go. Is there any way this can have any sort of a happy ending? Does this have to end bloody, brutally, and badly? Well, you just have to see where it goes. So the film was a box office hit. It grossed roughly 3 times its production cost, which is always the standard for is it a hit or is it not a hit? When you take production and marketing into account, if a film ends up grossing 3 times that, it's a success. And this film did that. I don't think it's free on any streaming service. It had been on HBO Max. I know that it was free with Prime. I'm not sure it's ever been free on Netflix, but this is a movie that it's worth checking out. It's worth a couple of bucks on Amazon Prime if you like this genre. And if you're a fan of Tarantino and you just happen to have not seen this particular film. 4 Rooms, I think he wrote 1 segment. It wasn't very good. Destiny Turns on the Radio was a complete catastrophe. He didn't have any part in the writing. He just acted in the movie. And Desperado, he has a quick role in that. I think he shot that just before From Dusk Till Dawn, also with Salma Hayek and Antonio Banderas. I think that he has a little bit of a speech in Desperado that he wrote, but other than that, he didn't have any creative input in that movie either. That was also a Robert Rodriguez film. The 2 guys then went on to do, Planet Terror and Death Proof, that kind of drive-in movie style, again, trashy exploitation. The one with Kurt Russell was Tarantino's Death Proof, his stuntman Mike. But From Dusk Till Dawn is a guilty pleasure, but it is one of the best movies that I would consider a guilty pleasure. Now, I love George Clooney. I don't know, I didn't feel like doing a George Clooney birthday episode because I could talk about the guy for 2 hours. Clooney has made so many different movies that are worth full episodes on their own. And I'd even include The Perfect Storm in that, which I absolutely love. A great movie. Even though if you knew the true story, you knew exactly what was going to happen, it's still fantastic. And more rewatchability factor than you would ever expect for the kind of movie that it is. Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino, 1996 collaboration. Rodriguez directed, Quentin wrote, From Dusk Till Dawn, starring Quentin Tarantino, George Clooney, Juliette Lewis, Harvey Keitel, Fred Williamson. Oh, and I forgot Cheech Marin from Cheech and Chong. He plays 3 roles. He plays their point person that they're going to meet in Mexico and go to El Rey. But From Dusk Till Dawn, the 11th entry in our ongoing series of guilty pleasure movies. This has been episode number 178 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your early Monday evening with me here in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you caught the episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 179 real soon. Till then, peace.